It's been a really great decade for video games. Like, incredibly good. When I look at the games I haven't included on this list, like Doom, God of War, Mario Odyssey, GTA 5, Shovel Knight, both Red Dead Redemptions, Super Mario Maker, not to mention the games still on my backlog like Mass Effect 2, The Last of Us, The Witcher 3, which I actually started this week, toss a coin to your Witcher. There have been so many incredible games this decade. Narrowing this list down to just 10 was very hard, but I've done it. Of course, these are the games that connected most with me this decade. With the depth and variety of games this decade, I'd imagine there will be many lists that include none of these games. But let's get to it. The top 10 games of the decade. Iteration over innovation is the key to Marvel Spider-Man's success. It doesn't reinvent the open world genre or give you a dramatically new take on Spider-Man. Instead, it focuses more on perfecting every element of its package. The thing you will hear people say most after playing this game is it makes you feel like Spider-Man. From every satisfying thwip when you shoot a web, to Spidey's detailed acrobatic animations, to the speed at which you can transition from running on walls back to swinging through the cities, to the various combat options you have at your disposal, you can see how they painstakingly recreated the experience of being Spider-Man as fluidly and comprehensively as possible. Few games have nailed the feeling of the superhero they're representing better than Insomniac Games did with Marvel Spider-Man. There's nothing quite like the perfect gameplay loop, where just the act of repeating the core mechanics of the game is so satisfying. SteamWorld Dig 2 has an incredible gameplay loop. You dig, you collect gems, you run out of health or light, you go back up to the surface, you upgrade, and you go again. You do this over and over. Every time you'll want to go back down, go a little further, dig a little deeper. Between the digging, the wonderful puzzle rooms, the really great progression, by the end of the game you'll wonder how you ever lived when you could just dig straight down. And the very charming robots. SteamWorld Dig 2 mastered the art of taking an addictive, satisfying gameplay loop and building a complete experience around it. A great sequel in every way, building and improving on everything the original did well. Generation 5 is my second favourite generation of Pokemon, behind Generation 2. I'm not sure is that a hot take at this stage, but I stand by it. I put more time into Pokemon Black 2 than any other Pokemon game ever. And there's a lot of Pokemon games, and I played all of them. The world, the music, the new Pokemon designs, the weird number of bridges in the world, I connected more with the Unova region than I did with many other Pokemon worlds. The game has an honestly solid story, even with the proviso of for a Pokemon game, it's still pretty good. And perhaps most importantly, Black and White 2 had the Pokemon World Tournament, where you could battle gym leaders and champions from the past. It's still the best post-game content in the history of Pokemon. Pander to my nostalgia more, Pokemon. I wonder has anybody ever had the demand of pander to my nostalgia more, Pokemon. Pokemon does a pretty good job of pandering to nostalgia. But regardless, I put a ton of time into Pokemon Black 2, and it is easily my favourite Pokemon game this decade. It's pretty amazing to think that at the start of the decade, the Fire Emblem series was on the verge of cancellation. If Fire Emblem Awakening wasn't a hit, the series would have been shelved. Awakening did the only thing possible to save the series, turn the horniness up to 11. Seriously though, Awakening's improved accessibility options coupled with being able to romantically pair all your favourites and have kids, resulted in a new identity for the series, one that made Awakening a ton of fun to play and a big hit in the process. At its core though, it was still the fast, snappy, brilliant tactical RPG the series has always been. Fire Emblem then completed the comeback story of the decade by having 800 characters in Smash, and just releasing the brilliant and hugely successful Three Houses. It's been a pretty good decade for Fire Emblem, kickstarted by the brilliant Fire Emblem Awakening. I could honestly take or leave the overall plot of Night in the Woods. The main story of the game feels secondary to where the game really excels. Night in the Woods is all about the moments in between. The charming interactions with the people in town, May's brilliant wit, the tone-perfect, charming, specific weirdness of so many of the characters, hanging out with Greg and Angus and heading to band practice. Each day in the game you want to talk to everybody in town, check in on how they're doing, and usually get a brilliant interaction or two before going about whatever the next main story beat is. A laid-back ambiance pervades the whole experience, from the small-town vibe to the brilliant, chill soundtrack. The strength of writing and depth of characterization made Night in the Woods one of the most memorable experiences this decade. I'm not particularly a fan of hard games, or at least punishingly hard games anyway. I'm too bad at games for them. So it was much to my surprise that not only did I beat Celeste, I absolutely adored it. Celeste is the most difficult game anybody can beat. Not just due to the user-friendly assist mode included, but also simply down to the way the game is structured. You'll die a lot, but you'll usually get a little further and learn a little more each time. And thankfully, once you clear a screen, you never have to think about it again. While the precision platforming, incredible stirring music, and beautiful visuals are pretty clear to see, you may not expect to be moved by a game like this. The story of Madeline overcoming anxiety, conquering self-doubt, and defeating a physical manifestation of that voice in your head that always tells you you're less than, provides emotional context to the challenge of scaling the mountain. You may have expected to be confronted by Celeste's gameplay, but you'll grow a little with its story in the process. No game defined just one more run for me this decade better than Dead Cells. I don't generally like roguelike games. I like procedurally generated ones even less. While in theory they encourage mastery of the mechanics, too often does it just leave me frustrated. Without any permanent progression, I usually just lose interest. Dead Cells incorporates its roguelite elements masterfully. Progression from run to run feels rewarding, as you have better items and mutations at your disposal. The procedural generation only tends to remix the levels than change them entirely, as large chunks remain the same. The real joy of Dead Cells though is the minute-to-minute combat. It is so perfectly tuned that every strike of a sword, every perfectly timed dodge, every exploding enemy feels incredible. There are times when you find your ideal character build and lock into a flawless, untouchable rhythm of destruction. And there are times where you get something terrible and you have to adapt, learning how to approach the game differently. It took me 40 hours to finally complete a run of the game, and every second of it was satisfying. It is the perfect action game. My experience playing Bloodborne was a deeply frustrating one. I had never played a From Software game, so naturally the game destroyed me over and over and over and over again. I played through that opening area for the best part of 3 hours without making any progression whatsoever. I'd keep on dying, getting slightly further, learning a little more, and then dying again. I hated it. It was anxiety inducing. I didn't even know how to upgrade my character or save my progress. Every time I made it just a little bit further, I'd suddenly be riddled with anxiety at what could be around the next corner. But I did eventually progress. Eventually that feeling of terror subsided, but never quite disappeared. And by the time I beat the game, I jumped right back into New Game Plus. I hate this game! I would frequently decry while playing. I didn't really. Bloodborne had me hook, line and sinker. One of the coolest things about The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild was the different stories you heard. Once you left the Great Plateau, everybody had a completely different experience with the game. The level of freedom and openness the game allowed encouraged you to do things however you wanted. You carve your own path through Hyrule, driven less by the nearest of the hundreds of icons on your minimap than whatever happened to catch your eye. The open world is so brilliantly designed as to always put something interesting on the horizon, something to drag you off the beaten path. Even the most focused player will be derailed by a shrine or interesting looking structure in the distance. It's a quiet experience, just you and Link peacefully exploring and saving the world. And when you are done, you'll have your own unique stories about your adventures in Hyrule. Super Mario Galaxy 2 might be the best game Nintendo has ever made. Decades of iteration and expertise and creativity come to the forefront in one of the most gleefully creative games ever made. It's a Mario game, so you know it plays like a dream, but the variety and sheer inventiveness of its levels is staggering. So many unique and brilliant ideas are thrown at you over and over with world-class presentation. It looks great, though I'm just saying, a HD version certainly wouldn't go astray, and the soundtrack is absolutely amazing. Building on and improving every aspect of the first game, Super Mario Galaxy 2 is my game of the decade. We nailed it by May 2010 this decade, not sure why we even bothered making games after that. Super Mario Galaxy 2 is bottled happiness, always there to spread joy whenever you need it. Well, that's it. The decade's done. That's 10 years of video games. 10 years of really damn good video games. I'll probably end up finishing The Witcher 3 and being like, how could I not include The Witcher on this list? But I doubt it. The Witcher is probably not like super duper my kind of game, even though it's probably a game I can appreciate it. But there we go. Game of the decade. What's yours? Let me know below if you have a game of the decade. Maybe you like all games equally. I don't know. You can follow me on Twitter at GarrettKidney, or ETTKIDNEY. On your left, my top 10 games of 2019. On your right, my top 10 Wii U games. Thanks for watching.